World Events, January 2022. Greetings and trust you are well. I have been meaning to write this for the past 2 months but have not known where to start. There are so many things to cover that I find the thought of writing this out quite daunting. With the dream visions, I find them much easier to type out. I simply have them sit down and put them out there. Writing about world events, putting them in line with the seer's words and then connecting them with what I have seen takes a lot out of me. Like usual, this is unscripted. I do not know what I will type, nor what will be said. So let's start with the most obvious. The Russian-Ukraine saga is now picking up. I have to unfortunately tie in with what has been mentioned in previous videos and comments on the site and then take the seer's words, slotting them in. Over the past 2 days I have had a number of insights about 2 events the seer spoke about. Let me mention them here. The one thing the seer said, Sina van Rensburg, he mentioned that there will be American and British troops in Germany, and he mentioned that in the future war, that is World War III, that our troops will be sent up north. Remember these 2 things he saw, and I will point him out how they are playing out right now. Okay, so let's discuss Ukraine. Ukraine is a tricky one to discuss without the facts. I am a facts-based person. I like facts. If you listen to the mainstream media, you simply hear lies and opinions are just that one person's opinion. To discuss Ukraine, we cannot discuss Ukraine without discussing NATO, and we cannot discuss NATO without discussing the former Soviet Union, and we cannot discuss many of these events without having a historical context of the world. My viewpoint is this: World War I took place due to events in South Africa. Nathan Rothschilds vowed early on to take out the Tsar of Russia. The Boers got support from Germany and Russia during the Boer War. One can actually say the Boer War was the First World War, with over 400,000 troops in South Africa. We find the same players in the game behind that war that we still find today on the world stage. We find that after arming the Boers, the Germans and Russians posed a threat to the Anglo-American alliance. Those 2 countries had to be sorted out by the very same players back then that we find today running the show still to this very day in the West. The players, main men behind these wars are gone, but their organizations for the most part are still with us. At the turn of the 20th century, the model of the world as islands and the heartland theory was developed. All the continents were seen as islands, and the theory was that whoever controlled the heartland controlled the islands. The heartland is Russia and the North Pole. It stretches from Russia to the North Pole and down into the upper portion of Iran, running through to Afghanistan. The theory is that whoever controlled Russia would eventually be master of the universe, or the big boss, and hence the New World Order have been after it. There is something else which we have to always be aware of. In the background, the Masons, the elites, the Jesuits, and all those who want world conquest. It was already discussed in the late 19th century that there would be 3 world wars. This was discussed and mentioned by Albert Pike, the high-degree Freemason. The goal of the Bavarian Illuminati that went to the Americas was to remove nobility from Europe, to control Europe, to prevent all wars or future wars, but that could only be achieved through their own war sanctions and war schemes. So you can see how messy this all gets. The only reason I mention this is that one can not only say it but also prove it, that the Soviet Union was for all intents and purposes made in the USA. All their money, equipment was shipped to them by America. There are many books written on this subject. The only reason I mention it is that the masses will only see the war and not see the intended outcome of these societies in the background with the goals. This is not scripted, so I do not know how long this would be. Hence why I have been scared to tackle the subject, because most analyze it simply from what they see happening, without taking a step back in history and without understanding nor bringing in these secret societies into the picture. It could also be that there are wars between these secret societies. We saw in World War II how Hitler was supported by the Catholics, and under him he was closing lodges. Freemason lodges in Europe and in the British Isles. What's interesting is that the Jesuits, the fathers of these Masons, are part of the Catholic fraternity. So there are even waters between these secret societies, so not all their plans go to plan. That is one thing to consider. So let's get to Ukraine and bring this all into the picture. Ukraine had its government overthrown by the big players in America back in 2014, all the while NATO got on top of Russia's borders. Ukraine was the final straw for Russia. Russia finally said no more. Now the media is crying that Russia is amassing troops on the borders of Ukraine, but remember, their troops are in their own territory. There is nothing illegal about this. The United States would not put up with Russia putting troops in Mexico or Canada. So why the big fuss about NATO? Well, when the Soviet Union was running, part of the agreement with the West in handing Germany East back was that it would bring the Cold War to an end and the West would no longer encroach on Russia turf. In the 1990s, Russia had an agreement, a verbal agreement with the US, that NATO would not absorb any of their former satellite states back into the Soviet Union. This was a verbal agreement. Now what we should ask ourselves, this is where I am going to say things which I have not heard anyone speak of but that fit in with the seer's words and the dream visions. Ask yourself, why did Russia not ask for a written agreement? Why did they simply accept the verbal agreement? Think about it, if your country faces a war, why would you only accept a verbal agreement and not get something more in concrete and get it on paper? Welcome to the lair, the bear's lair. I am going to say something which most will not see. Russia is in full control of everything we see happening. The bear has literally been leading the West closer to her lair. She has the West where she wants the West. The bear has been leading this hunter along a trail for the past 50 years, knowing full well the hunter would get tired, and now the hunter has found the bear's cave and has entered it. The hunter, America, is entering the bear's lair in darkness. Russia has been sitting on the sidelines watching the West implode through cultural Marxism, eating the West from the inside out. At the height of the Cold War, the American population and most populations in the West were 95% white. Today America is less than 70% white and declining fast. Russia knew full well America would get into wars which the West did, further bankrupting itself. Right from the start of this pandemic, I said this entire pandemic is nothing more than a communist plot to weaken the West from within. All the troops took this magic plot shot of a jab that no one knows what exactly is inside it. We saw troops in other countries, along with sports players, take the jab and who die of those ultra-rare conditions on the playing field, collapsing one after the other. You have had the best of the best military retire or leave early, creating a vacuum. They do not support their country. There is brewing tension among the populations of the West against the governments. Communism has at its core Taoism. In the Asian cultures where you find this Taoism, you find those ancient Taoists taught their kings that the best generals control other generals and through troops. It is a form of mind control through carefully planned moves. The bear has planned its moves knowing exactly what the West would do in the time that the Russians went to hibernate during those first few decades after the collapse of the Soviet Union, but they know all their plans, all their subversion they installed in the West would take root, would begin to hatch, and that by the time the bear woke up, the house would be crumbling within. The bear has lured the West into a trap at their most vulnerable time in the West's history. Higher inflation, high distrust, more distrust of the media than ever before, soldiers leaving in droves, a weakened economy. No nation can fight serious wars with these negative things stacked up against them. A few weeks back, early in the month, I told someone, NATO is going to fold. NATO is going to collapse. Today we see the first signs of NATO collapsing, with Croatia pulling out, saying should anything happen in Ukraine they are pulling out. This is going to put strain on NATO. Sina van Rensburg said that France would not get involved. I am willing to put money on it that NATO is going to collapse. Now for the insights. How or why did the Americans and Brits go to Germany that the seer warned us about? Well, because Russia is going to invade from the far western portion, as I saw in the dream vision, from Latvia and Lithuania. That dream has begun to play out with the dream step 1 complete, Krakshikshonova. That was step 1 in their main moves. They're relying on the media to continue talking about Ukraine. Remember the dream vision? I told the American women what would happen to America. I said, I saw it on the media, on every television in Russia, on every screen there was non-stop coverage of a Russian invasion. Russia was in the news on every TV and on different TV stations. This is beginning to play out right now and it will continue fast. During the Dream Vision, the timeline Dream Vision, I was shocked. I said so in the video. The Dream Vision gave a timeline like what was told to me before the March 2020 lockdowns. By December all will be fulfilled. I am scared to say that it will be fulfilled because the ramifications are so mind-blowing that we cannot even begin to grasp the impact this will have. See all these camps they've been building around the world for those infected with this deadly scamdemic. Those are all internment camps for this coming war. See the ones in Australia, those are the ones the CRR troops will eventually find themselves in during the next war when they're taken prisoner up north and interned in Australia, according to the CIR. I do not even think that those who built the camps know this event will take place that the CIR mentioned. Now to bring back the collapse of NATO, how do I know NATO will collapse? The CIR mentioned that France will not partake. What else? Why would they need troops from South Africa if their NATO project was going so well? If it was going so well and so powerful, there would be no need for our troops to be sent there. The main reason for this build-up in Ukraine is to take control of the heartland. Few people are mentioning this new North Pole sea route the Russians are working on. Combine this with the gas exports, you have one of the richest countries rising up, and if the West do not take care of the bear now, they will have no other chance in the future. The Russians are in full control of this. I notice America is telling NATO to prepare thousands of troops, but like usual, they only offer a few hundred of a few thousand, nothing like the amount of NATO troops from Europe. Europeans fighting Europeans for what? Who benefits? Not the people, only the bankers, the elites. When the first incident happens, NATO collapses. The result will be hysteria in the West, hysteria in America, and this is when those northern Europeans of Sweden, Norway join NATO. This is why something horrific happens to them. As the CIR mentioned, they were hatching a plan, but then something goes terribly wrong. They join NATO, that is what goes wrong. The result will be that the Russians will invade and take care of them. More and more signs in the meantime keep popping up in South Africa, the burning of the parliament. The EFF showing up at restaurants whipping the foreigners, getting him on board like they did back in the day with the necklacing, then yesterday or the day before. The masses showing up in Sandton to demand that they be employed or there will be issues. This all comes to the forefront as Zuma faces his trial, Cyril is challenged and Zuma meets with the Xhosa king. Something is brewing. Zuma was in charge of the student protests during the apartheid years, and the same chaos we saw in the past is more than likely going to pick up at a time we see the masses of unemployment kick in. We have things brewing in the country at the most unstable time. We see food prices rising worldwide. Remember the CIR said there would be famines even in Britain. So combine the economic situation with the instability of the governments, the build-up with Russia. America cannot back off now. If they do, they will forever lose their place and image among Europeans, and Russia